Welcome back to Love Is. I'm your host, Stacey Herrera. Today, we need to talk about something that's probably happened to a lot of us. And that is opening a text message or an email to find an unexpected photo of someone's anatomy that we didn't ask for. I'm talking about dick pics. And I know you understand. And you probably, if you're like the rest of us, are wondering, why do they do that? Why do they think that it's okay to send unsolicited photos of their equipment? I don't know. Maybe they think it's going to make us swoon. And it does make some people swoon. And if you swoon over that kind of thing, there is no judgment. But for all intents and purposes for this episode, we are talking about when you don't swoon, when you don't want to receive those kinds of messages uninvited. But, of course, there's a but. This conversation is about so much more than inappropriate photos. It's about how we are losing the art of seduction in the digital age. I know you didn't see that coming. I know you thought I was going to go somewhere else with it, but stick with me. I am. Let's begin with what's actually happening here. So in nature, Y chromosomes often engage in these elaborate displays to attract attention. I mean, think about like peacocks and their beautiful plumes, or, those birds. You see those birds on the documentary and they're doing those little dances, like getting their nest ready to invite company over. Or, or the whales that heave themselves out of the water and splash against the surface. All of those things are Y chromosomes trying to get attention. For human Y chromosomes or human penis owners, somewhere between evolution and the invention of smartphones, they decided to start skipping the dance entirely and go straight for the shock value. I mean, we've got these big, beautiful brains that can override our biology, yet there is still so many things that are primitive about us, right? We might be tempted to just, dismiss dick pics as just bad behavior. And don't get me wrong, if it's uninvited, it is bad behavior. But there's something deeper happening here about technology and how that has changed the way that we approach connection and desire and attraction and intimacy, all of those things. So this is the part where I bring in some of the wisdom of one of my favorite relationship therapists, Esther Perel, because she talks about the crucial difference between seduction and harassment. And for people who receive unwanted cock shots, that feels like harassment, right? So she talks about that. According to Esther, it's not just about like the action itself. It's about how it makes the recipient feel. And true seduction, according to Esther, is like a dance. It's an invitation that creates space for, response and willingness. It's about building anticipation, creating possibility, and allowing desire to develop naturally. Harassment, on the other hand, is about power and control, and it's an imposition that demands attention rather than earning it. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you felt truly seduced versus when you felt imposed or put upon? And I'm not just talking about dating here. Even if you are in a long-term relationship, really sit with that question. When was the last time you felt seduced or when you felt imposed upon? And that distinction between seduction and imposition, it matters a lot. And in these digital spaces, that distinction is becoming even blurrier because that same technology that helps us to stay connected with our partners or with potential partners can also be a tool for harassment. That quick hit of attention that comes from sending a dick pic, it's like the fast food version of, I don't even want to say intimacy because it's not intimate, right? But it's like the fast food version of seduction or bids for connection. It's like quick, it's unsatisfying, and it feels empty, not just for the recipient of the picture, but also for the sender, because it's like a compulsion almost, trying to get a need met. And in established relationships, sometimes we find ourselves, accepting behavior that doesn't feel good just because it's been normalized. Not just even in established relationships. That's starting now, that this has been going on for quite a minute. Receiving these pics that you didn't ask for has also become normalized. Even if you don't like it, even if you express your disinterest, even if you express your dissatisfaction, there is still something that is now normal about that. And that's true whether we're talking about, dick pics or other forms of digital attention seeking. If we were to extend it out, we could also, talk about like the trolls that, go through the comments and just say heinous things just to get a rise as opposed to contributing to whatever the online discussion is. So same thing, but we're not talking about that today. Either way, these things have become so normalized, and while we don't like it and it doesn't feel good, it sometimes makes us accept things that we don't want or deserve. So we need to talk about power, but not in the way that you think. And again, this applies whether you're single or in a relationship. You have to define what feels good for you. And I'm not talking about taking responsibility for someone else's behavior. That's not your job. But it is about knowing that you get to set the tone for how you want to be approached and treated. Because again, this isn't just about explicit photos. It's about the way we communicate desire and interest, whether we're flirting with someone new or trying to, you know, stoke the flames in an existing relationship. This is about communication and how we approach, attraction and needs and wants in all facets of our lives. So where do we go from here? It's like, Stacey, that's great and everything, but what are we doing with all this? Okay, I get that. So first, you need to decide what feels like seduction to you. Like, what does that feel like? Is it tone of voice or tone of text? Is it the way someone looks at you? Is it showing genuine interest? Really feeling like the person is interested in you as a person? Like, what is seduction for you? And you also need to know what feels like harassment to you. And your feelings are valid in every situation. And this is, this sounds like, this sounds like the setup for setting boundaries. And it is, but with a caveat, because the way that we think about boundaries often gets misunderstood. Boundaries are not about rules for other people. They're not rules for other people to follow. They are guidelines for ourselves. So no one is responsible for honoring or respecting your boundaries. It is up to you to hold those. So instead of expecting other people to respect your boundaries, we need to focus on honoring them ourselves. And that might mean choosing not to engage with people who send unwanted photos. It might mean removing ourselves from situations that don't feel good or redirecting our energy toward connections that align with how we want to be treated, right? Here's an example, a little off topic, but it applies. I have a thing about people showing up unannounced to my house. As a rule, I prefer people to come over invited and not uninvited. And so I haven't done this in a long time and I'm trying to work on it. But because I realize that, it's a barrier to entry to intimacy now. But, I prefer people to call me before they come on by. And in the past, I would leave somebody outside if they just showed up unannounced. It wasn't me telling them, like, don't come over my house unannounced. It was just like, oh, well, if someone comes over unannounced, I don't open the door. And like now that I'm in this season of life, I recognize that as a barrier to entry. I have not done anything about it yet, and I thankfully have not had to leave somebody outside in years. But you see the difference, though. This example is the difference, is that, rather than opening the door and saying to the person, don't come over my house unannounced, I don't need to chastise them. It's just like, what am I going to do with the new information? They stopped by, and most people who know me don't stop by because they know how I feel about that. But, in the past, there have been people that just decided they were the exception, and that was fine. I didn't need to tell them anything. It was just like, oh, I didn't know they were coming, and so I didn't open the door. Again, I haven't had to do that in years. And now I'm softening because community means something different to me. And I was in a very defensive, self-defensive space for many years, like thinking that setting barriers instead of boundaries was how I needed to protect my peace. And now I'm moving into a different space. But anyways, you see what I mean about the difference between honoring your own boundaries and expecting others to do that. Okay, so back to what we were talking about. You get to choose. You get to choose. So again, in practice, instead of saying, don't send me those kinds of photos, you might say, I only engage with people who take the time to build connection first. So instead of demanding someone change their approach, you might say, I'm choosing to communicate with people who express their interest in ways that feel genuine to me. Or you can just simply say that that's not my preference. I'm going to focus my energy elsewhere. Or that's not my preference. I think that we might not be a match. The end. So the key here is not trying to control or change anyone else's behavior. We're simply stating how we choose to engage and where we put our attention. That is always up to us. The key here is, again, not that we're trying to control or change anybody else's behavior. We're simply stating how we choose to engage and where we put our attention. Okay? So before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought. I know this was a lot to ingest. You might need to listen to this episode twice, and I hope that you do. This conversation isn't about shaming men, and that's the reason that, the majority of this was about what we can do and how we can choose and how we move for ourselves, and not making men feel small or ridiculous for exposing themselves, because there's a lot of other things going on there too. But this podcast is for midlife women, so we're not talking about that today. But if I were to explore that, there's something else going on underneath the maybe feeling invisible or feeling powerless that comes in sending a photo of genitalia that nobody asked for. But again, we aren't trying to change their behavior. We are just being intentional about how we move. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final thought. True seduction, whether it's in person or digital, and by digital, that could mean on text message or in a dating app. It could be via email or whatever. But true seduction with somebody new or with your partner of 20 years, it's about creating space for possibility, inviting and not imposing, anticipation, not aggression. Because love is choosing consciousness over convenience and respect over reaction. More importantly, love is about connection over control. That's some bars, right? Connection over control. So until next time, keep loving like you mean it. Be intentional with your words and your actions. And take good care of your heart. I love you.